Hey, Canada. Listen to this one. It's a CBC News article under the Indigenous section, right? Analysis. Why inquiry into missing and murdered Indigenous women should resist calls to include men. I mean, anyone that pays attention, and I get there's all going to be all kinds of disputes and arguments about this, but listen, if you're paying attention, which I do, obviously I pay attention every day. I'm not left in the dark at any time because I pay attention continuously, right? And I know the kind of narrative and information and premise that the folks at the CBC try to put forth. And I recognize it's all about progressive, collectivism, promoting government initiatives, right? There's no and feminism. I mean, just look at who makes up the bulk of those on the CBC or how they self-describe themselves. Even the Prime Minister of Canada is a self-described feminist, for fuck's sakes. And I mean, we all know how the dominant narrative put forth by most of the establishment media in Canada is of the leftist, liberal, collectivist bent. We know this. I mean, I know there are people that try to deny it, but the only people that try to deny it are people that live in that world and don't know how to understand or function outside that little bubble, right? So yeah, of course they're going to say, well, no, it's not, but they're living in an echo chamber. It's like, do you not recognize how many times you hear? That's the crazy part that I don't understand. It's like when you're sitting in a room, like if you're at CBC, right? And I'm waiting. I wait all the time. It's like, where are these articles that are going to promote actual liberty? Or libertarian, like the philosophy of liberty, or libertarian, right? Values, principles, or anything, even if you don't care about libertarianism, which is just the philosophy of liberty, but even if you want to take that term or word out of the equation, just what it means, like be objectively true in your reporting of like 2 + 2 = 4 and how that's easily, and nobody could deny it. You don't see that. No, it's always got some kind of a political bend or narrative behind it. And you know that. But yeah, so the CBC, the bulk of the people at the CBC, and we all know, like, this is unionized people. Even if I've heard some people say, oh, there's appointees from the conservatives that are on the board of the CBC. So no, it's not all leftists. Listen, go work in a company, right, that has a union and is part of the government, or as with CBC, which is the fourth branch of government, you might as well say, right? And tell me how that the dominant narrative espoused within that institution doesn't have the power to override even a few members on the board that might be considered, let's say, conservative, right? But even when they talk about the conservatives in Canada, that's not a genuine conservative. Before Harper even took them on, they were called progressive conservatives. And even Harper, they were the reformists. There's no genuine zero. There's no such thing in Canada. Well, I think maybe the Wild Rose is probably the closest thing you would get that would be actually close to an actual conservative party. But there's no such thing as an actual conservative party in Canada. They're all left. The closest you'll get might be somewhat close to the center, but it's either center right, center left, or center far left. There's no actual right, period. Right? But anyways, oh, here we go. Oh yeah. Coalition that wants men and boys included is aligned with controversial men's right group. So why would it? Anyways, let me just read on. And oh my God, the author of this article, shocking revelation, folks. Stephanie Cram. Stephanie Cram. I wonder how much emphasis she is going to put on men and how much care she's going to have towards men's issues. Well, let's read on, shall we? Last week, a new coalition called Expand the Inquiry met with federal officials to argue that the need to expand the terms and scope of the inquiry into missing and murdered Indigenous women to include men and boys. Oh my God, like, how outrageous can they get, right? In your little missing and murdered Aboriginal women and girls, could you include the men and boys into that too? Why not, right? But, that's controversial. This is the world you live in, folks. What's that saying? You want to know who rules over you? Look who you're not allowed to fucking insult or go against. Right? The coalition's leader, Chief Ernie Cray of Chim First Nation in British Columbia, became an advocate for Indigenous women after his sister, Dawn Cray, was killed by Robert Pickton. So, the coalition leader, so the leader of the whole movement for the murdered and missing Aboriginal women and girls, is a man, and he was the one that was a staunch proponent of this whole thing into investigating murdered and missing Aboriginal women. So a man is chosen, and he made that as his first point of preference and importance, was to investigate women, right? And girls, which, like I say, we men, right? That's good men anyways. We always look to be the protectors and the providers, right? So yes, just like if a boat was sinking, we're looking to protect the women and children, right? Anyways, let me continue on. Cray said he refocused his attention after hearing from families across the country about the lack of advocacy for missing and murdered Indigenous men. His coalition argues that because 70% of murdered Indigenous people are men, they should be included in the inquiry. So this whole thing about the murdered and missing Aboriginal women, and like I say, every person is an individual, and every person has family, friends, neighbors, co-workers that care tremendously for them and that are going to be hurt and suffer hardships as a result of these losses. So I appreciate every individual story, right? But if 70% of these cases are men, right? Not negating or denying the 30% women. Everybody should have equal opportunity to have their deaths or anything negative that happened to them studied, investigated, and any punitive actions towards those who caused any hardships, pain, suffering, or death to someone else should be punished accordingly, right? But why in the fuck, if 70% of all the murdered and missing Aboriginal people, if they're men, shouldn't they be included? Does that not make total sense to you? As in, if you're a moral and compassionate human being, shouldn't both be included? But let me continue on. But that statistic doesn't change the fact that Indigenous women face a significantly higher rate of violent victimization than men, including physical and sexual assault. So now we're getting into different varying degrees, and there's no way to even prove that statistically, right? You'd have to literally go to each and every, it would be a very, very all-encompassing and profound method to try to weed through all this shit. But so once again, it all falls back, shouldn't we include both sexes? And it doesn't change the fact that MMIW, Murdered Missing Indigenous Women Inquiry, was created to explain why Indigenous women are targeted and find ways to stop it. Those explanations and solutions would be much different in the case of violence against Indigenous men and boys. Why? Shouldn't we care about both? And regardless if the explanation is different, that shouldn't matter. Of course, it's not all one big, we're not all one big fucking collective. There's going to be all kinds of different reasons and explanations and stories behind each individual case. Fucking collectivists, right? Man. And special interest groups. People that pick, obviously this woman only cares about women. What stands out most about the Expand the Inquiry Coalition is that it has aligned itself with the Canadian Association for Equality. What a fucking terrible thing that is. The Canadian Association for Equality. one of the loudest and most controversial voices in so-called men's rights activism. So once again, even just in that little bit, they try to undermine even the fact that there's even such thing as a men's rights activism or movement. Do men do this? Do men try to undermine it? No, I'm not seeing any articles where men are saying, "Oh, fuck the Aboriginal women, don't fucking investigate." You don't see any of that, do you? Why? Because no. Like I say, and most people recognize in their own immediate family or in their own environment who are the people that are truly honest with you and moral and objective and principled. Recognize. The group has been accused of trying to spread misleading information about domestic violence, including with a billboard ad in Toronto last year that suggested men are as likely as women to be victims. And they're showing a picture of the billboard. Half of domestic violence victims are men. No domestic violence shelters are dedicated to us. And then hashtag let's talk men. Ooh, what a terrible thing, right? And yes, half the domestic violence is towards men. Even it might be other men or women, or maybe even if the women don't have the power to overrule or beat them up or beat them senseless, if you still got someone beating up on you or trying to beat up on you, even if they can't physically, harm you detrimentally, that's still going to play an effect on your psychology, on you as a person when someone's always trying to beat up on you, right? And you're not allowed to even defend yourself. Like, understand these things. But like I say, these feminists, these social justice warriors, these people that try to talk about all-inclusiveness and accepting and multiculturalism and, accepting of all they're liars. The only thing they'll accept is if you agreeing with them. If you don't, they don't accept you in one shape or in any way, and you know this. Craig Mix expanding inquiry didn't vet Cafe. They were the group that came forward and said, we can join forces. I haven't delved into their history, their campaigns, or issues they've involved themselves in, Cray said. I would be the last one to say that everyone and anyone I've ever worked with can be painted illy white without blemish. Cafe spokesman Justin Trottier said the stories of missing and murdered men should be included in the inquiry because violence against Indigenous women has already been extensively studied. We've had many inquiries into murdered and missing girls and women. This isn't the first one, he said. That's simply not true. So now we're going to get into, anyways, let me read a little bit more. In 2010, the Missing Women Commission of Inquiry in BC examined the disappearance of women along the Highway of Tears, a stretch between Prince Rupert and Prince George, but didn't specifically examine the unique circumstances of Indigenous women who'd gone missing or been murdered. Neither has any other federal or provincial inquiry. So if the government has failed at every junction, because that's what they're basically admitting there, to do what should have been properly done multiple times prior, right? And think about the countless millions of dollars that was spent on this kind of bullshit, and they're saying, well, they weren't done that way, right? Well, maybe you should have done that properly in the first fucking place, right? But the fact that they're seemingly totally against including men or boys, right? The hardship, the pain, the suffering of men and boys, the fact that they're against that and don't want to be inclusive totally in that endeavor, I mean, that speaks volumes, Canada. That should speak volumes to anyone to know who are your true enemies, who are your true oppressors, who are the true fucking sociopath and control freaks in this country that have no semblance and don't care one bit about a large, substantial, almost half of the population in this fucking country. Right? You want to know who's dividing and trying to conquer the country? Look no further. Recognize and realize these words speak volumes. It's Canadian Libertarian, and I love liberty.